Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Jason Montero, and I'll be conducting the webinar for today. October was a very interesting month for the equity markets and mutual funds as well. We saw about 12,600 crore flowing into equity mutual funds. That is from the investor side. Mutual funds, on the other hand, invested around 24,000 crore into stocks. There's a huge difference of about 12,000 crore. Most of this would have come from the excess amount that was kept in debt by balance funds, also the cash side of equity mutual funds. So in this presentation, we will be looking at what equity mutual funds bought and sold over the month. So I'll take a moment to get to the presentation. So as you can see, equity mutual funds, a net inflow of 12,600 crore in October. This is again an increase of over 1,000 crore from September. About 11,000 crore was invested in September 2018. Mutual funds invested 24,000 crore in stocks in the month of October. Out of this, around 90% of the assets were invested in large cap stocks. Now we have taken an imputed inflow. So this is the change in quantity of shares in October into the average price of October. So around 26,000 crore was the imputed inflow into large cap stocks. We also saw around 1,500 crore invested in mid caps. Small caps were largely avoided in the past few months, but we saw 12,600 crore being invested in small cap stocks in the month of October. This is a gain of about 1,000 crore over 215 crore that was invested in September 2018. If you look at the sectors, fund houses were aggressively buying banks and refineries. Healthcare stocks and capital goods stocks were on the bearish side of mutual funds. So this slide basically shows the inflows into equity mutual funds. As you can see, there's been a steady rise over the past 3 months. Inflows were gradually dropping from April to August and then rising over the past couple of months. SIP inflows have been steady, around 7,500 crore. It's been gradually rising to 7,900 crore in October 2018. We also saw the redemptions reduced to 10,000 crore from nearly 16,000 crore in August 2018. So we have seen lesser redemptions from equity mutual funds over the past few months. Now, what were mutual funds buying and selling? On the large cap side, we saw 65 stocks being bought while 36 stocks were sold. This was an imputed inflow of about 26,000 crore. On the mid-cap side of about 150 stocks, 93 stocks were bought, while 55 stocks were sold. There was an imputed inflow of 1,500 crore. On the small cap side, usually the buying and selling used to be equal, but this month we saw a massive buying of about 250 stocks versus a selling of 154 stocks. Here again, the imputed inflow was around about 1,260 crore. So now we look at the large cap stocks that were bought and sold by mutual funds. This is in terms of quantity change. So Coal India was the top bought stock. It was being added by HDFC mutual fund. New India Insurance also was among the top picks, added by SBI. Then again, BPCL also, which was added by HDFC and SBI. You can see the quantity change, 68% change for Coal India. On the sell side, we had BHEL, Bharti Infratel, and Indiabulls Housing Finance. That were the large cap stocks that were sold. If you can see in quantity change, the quantity bought fell by around 30% for each of these stocks. BHEL was sold by Reliance and HDFC, while Bharti Infratel was sold by ICICI and LIC Mutual Fund. Now we'll take a look at the top 20 large cap stocks bought by value. As you can see, Axis Bank was the most picked large cap stock, an imputed inflow of about 3,000 crore into Axis Bank. Axis Bank was bought largely by ICICI Mutual Fund and Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund. Next up was Reliance Industries with another imputed inflow of 3,000 crore. ICICI, Reliance and Aditya Birla again were buying Reliance Industries. If you can see the total imputed inflow, it was around 20,000 crore into these top 10 large cap stocks. So you can see the inflows into large caps were heavily skewed to these few companies. The total inflows of the top 20 stocks were about 28,000 crore. On taking a look at the top large caps that were sold, we have Yes Bank, GAIL, ONGC that were heavily sold on the list. Yes Bank was heavily sold by Aditya Birla Sun Life, GAIL was sold by ICICI Mutual Fund, and ONGC was sold by Reliance Mutual Fund. The top 10 stocks accounted for an outflow of about 3,500 crore for equity mutual funds, and the top 20 stocks accounted for about 4,900 crore of outflows. We'll just spend a moment on the slide to take a look at the other holdings that were heavily sold. Now coming over to mid caps that were bought and sold in terms of quantity. ACC, HEG, and NBCC were the top bought stocks by mutual funds. ACC was bought by Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund, and HEG was bought by L&T Mutual Fund. Among the selling pressure, we see Dewan Housing Finance and GMR Infrastructure. Dewan is once again on the top sell list of mutual funds. In terms of value, we have ACC, which was the top bought mutual fund by value. Sorry, ACC are the top bought mid-cap stock by value. Then we have Bharat Financial Inclusion, Future Retail, LIC Housing Finance. The top 10 stocks accounted for a total inflow of about 2,100 crore, while the top 20 mid-cap stocks accounted for a total inflow of 2,900 crore. I'll just take a moment over here. Moving on to the top 20 mid-cap stocks sold by value. We have Power Finance, Divi's Lab, CESC, Dewan Housing Finance that were the top sold mid-cap stocks. Kotak was the heavy seller of PFC. DSP and Canara were the mutual fund were the funds that sold Divi's Lab, and Reliance Mutual Fund was the fund house that sold CESC. Also on the list, you see Page Industries. Page Industries was sold by IDFC Mutual Fund. If those who have been tracking the portfolios of mutual funds would have realized that Kenneth Andrade was very bullish on this stock once upon a time for Page Industries. IDFC Mutual Fund is now selling the stock. Kenneth Andrade, he left the fund house quite some time back, a few years back. Among the small cap stocks that were bought and sold by mutual funds in value term, we see a heavy inflow in Laopala. This stock was bought by DSP small cap fund. You can see the quantity change. It's a huge change over the previous month. Gujarat Fluorochemicals, SpiceJet was the other stocks that were bought. Among the stocks that were sold, there was Merck, Agrotech Foods, and RSWM. Merck was bought by HDFC Mutual Fund, and Merck was sold by HDFC Mutual Fund, and Agrotech Foods was sold by SBI Mutual Fund. And taking a look at the small caps bought in terms of value, again we have Gujarat Fluorochemical on the top of the list. KEC International, Karur Vysya, and NIT were the other stocks that were heavily bought. KEC was again bought by HDFC and Aditya Birla Sun Life. Karur Vysya was bought by ICICI Mutual Fund and Reliance Mutual Fund, while NIT Technologies was bought by HDFC Mutual Fund and Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund. The top 20 small caps sold by value, we have Mahindra CIE Automotive, Infibeam Avenues, TCNS Clothing, that was the top sold stocks. Around 900 crore flew out of the top 10 stocks, while around 1,1200 crore flew out of the top 20 stocks in terms of value. We take a look at the top 5 stocks with no change in value. This is over September to October. Mutual funds kept their holdings unchanged in these stocks. We have ICRA, Time Technoplast, IGSEC, AG Infra Engineering. We see there was no change in these stocks. Most of these stocks belong to the small cap segment. Stocks with the highest buying and selling, we see Motilal Oswal Services, which was heavily picked up. Lao Pala again, which we saw, which was picked up by DSP. JK Paper and Avanti Feeds. This is in terms of quantity. Top stocks sold by mutual funds based on quantity were Infibeam Avenues, PC Jewelers, 8K Miles, and Geojet. Now we take a look at, on a consensus basis, what were top AMCs buying and selling. So we can see Axis Bank was picked up by around 29 mutual funds, or in other words, 29 mutual funds increased their exposure over October 2018 to Axis Bank. Only 3 mutual funds reduced their exposure to this stock. So you can see there's a high consensus among mutual funds in buying the stock. Similarly, we have UPL, Adani Ports, and Grasim Industries that were high consensus buys, where a large number of mutual funds were increasing their exposure to these stocks. On the sell side, we see a large number of mutual funds selling India Bulls, Asian Paints, Federal Bank, HPCL, Ashok Leyland. 14 mutual funds reduced their exposure to India Bulls, while 8 mutual funds increased their exposure. Asian Paints is more or less balanced, but there was still a large number of buys over here. Similarly for Federal Bank. Many fund houses were also buying Raymond. Moving on to the sectoral purchases, banks, refineries, and IT was the most bought sectors by mutual funds. 8,300 crore was invested in banks, 5,200 crore was invested in refineries, while about 4,100 crore was invested in IT stocks. Among the banks, Axis Bank, as we saw, was the favorite. HDFC Bank and SBI were the others that were bought by mutual funds. On the refinery side, we have RIL that was included, BPCL. Among the IT stocks, there was Infosys and TCS that were the most bought stocks. Net buying was also seen in auto and FMCG. In auto, we had Mahindra and Mahindra and Maruti Suzuki among the top bought stocks. In FMCG, we had ITC. Among the top sectors sold, we have healthcare, oil exploration, and capital goods sectors that were heavily sold. Among healthcare stocks, there was Lupin and Divi's Lab that were on the top of the sell list. ONGC of the oil exploration companies was the heavily sold stock. Again, we saw BHEL in capital goods sector that faced a strong selling pressure. Page Industries from the textile industry faced a strong sell. As we saw earlier, IDFC was the top seller for Page Industries. This is a very interesting slide. We didn't have this last time. So here we see the top 20 sectors and how the exposure changed over the past few months, over the past year, in fact. So we can see in banks, the total exposure of mutual funds to banks fell to about 19% in April, but again gradually increased over the past few months to around 22%. IT stocks has also been increasing over the past year and is now at 9.2%. Automobiles was around 10.5% last year. It has gradually fallen to around 8%, sorry, 8.8%. Finance stocks has been more or less the same. It increased, say in June, July to 9.6%, nearly 10%, and now it's again around 9%. Among the top sectors, again, we have healthcare, FMCG stocks. FMCG also has increased significantly from, say, 5% to around 6% currently. Also, we see consumer durables, which has been more or less similar, about 1.5% over the past year. Now we take a look at what the top AMCs were buying and selling. These top AMCs are based on the equity AUM, so ranking from the highest to the 10th rank AMC. First up is HDFC Mutual Fund with a total equity assets managed of about 1,31,000 crore. In HDFC Mutual Fund, we see a heavy inflow into large cap stocks. About 2,800 crore was invested in large caps. About 500 crore each, 400 to 500 crore each was invested in mid cap and small cap stocks. HDFC was bullish on refineries, mining and bank sectors. It was bearish on retailing, capital goods and construction materials. The outflows was not as much from these sectors, so more or less HDFC was not broadly negative on any sector. Here we can see a huge buying in refineries. In refineries, there was Reliance that was a heavily bought stock. Taking a look at the quantity change, we have HPCL, Coal India, and Indian Oil Corporation. These were the top large cap stocks that were bought by HDFC Mutual Fund. The top large cap stocks that were sold were Bajaj Auto, BHEL, and Ashok Leyland. You can see the quantity reduced by around 30% to 40% in these stocks. HPCL witnessed a heavy buying. The quantity changed by 93%. Similarly, for Coal India, it increased by about 90%. Moving to the mid-cap stocks that were bought and sold by HDFC Mutual Fund, we have Bharat Financial Inclusion, NBCC and ACCC that were the top bought mid-cap stocks. Bharat Financial Inclusion, the quantity of shares increased by 81% for the fund house. Among the mid-cap stocks sold were ABB India, Tata Power, GlaxoSmithKline Consumer. Again, the selling was not as much. The quantity reduced by less than 10% for these stocks. Among the small cap stocks that were bought and sold by HDFC Mutual Fund, we have Finolex, Gujarat Fluorochemicals, and Orient Refractories that were the top bought stocks. There was heavy buying in small caps. You can see the value change maybe not that much, but quantity change has been very aggressive. HDFC Mutual Fund more than doubled its exposure to these three stocks in the small cap segment. Among the small caps sold were Merck, MCX, and Cochin Shipyard. The quantity of Merck reduced by half for HDFC Mutual Fund. MCX and the other companies, there was a marginal reduction in exposure up to about 7% and 2% for PNC, Infratech, and Navneet Education. Next on the list is SBI Mutual Fund with assets managed of 1,25,000 crore. Like other fund houses, SBI Mutual Fund 2 was buying large cap stocks. About 4,200 crore was invested in large caps. Mid caps and small caps were avoided, while small caps saw an inflow of just 143 crore. If we take a look at the inflows, this is also dependent on the inflows into the specific scheme. So if there was a high inflow into a large cap scheme, the allocation to large cap stocks will be greater. If there was less inflows into a small cap scheme, these inflows would not change that much. So this is also dependent on scheme-wise inflows. Among the sectors that were bought by SBI Mutual Fund were banks, refineries, and finance stocks. About 1,240 crore was invested in banks. Similarly, about 600 crores was invested in refineries. On the sell list, we had alcohol stocks, healthcare, and consumer durable stocks. Not much of selling a year again seen in the bottom sectors. Among the large caps that were bought by SBI Mutual Fund, we saw Shree Cement, the New India Assurance, Bank of Baroda, and Ambuja Cements. Shree Cements, the quantity increased by 65%, and for New India Insurance, it increased by 62%. Heavy buying in these few companies. Among the large cap stocks that were sold were Cadila Healthcare then we saw Colgate Palmolive and Shriram Transport Finance. A reduction of about 10% in exposure. Among the mid-cap stocks that were bought and sold, Punjab National Bank, the exposure increased by 50% in quantity terms. JSPL, again, the exposure increased by nearly 50%. Imami's saw an exposure increase of about 45%. SBI Mutual Fund was bearish on United Breweries, Apollo Hospitals, and Kansai Nerolac Paints. Here we see again a heavy reduction in exposure. About 70%, there was a reduction in number of shares for United Breweries and Apollo Hospitals. Among the small cap stocks bought and sold by SBI Mutual Fund, Shobha, Indian Energy, and Aavas Financiers were the top bought stocks. Here we see again aggressive buying in terms of quantity for Shobha and India Energy Exchange. In quantity terms, the exposure more than doubled for these two companies. Among the small cap stocks that were sold, we had Agrotech Foods, Deepak Nitrate, and V8 Tech Wabag. The exposure dropped by 38% and 10% each for the remaining two stocks. Coming to ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, here again we saw a heavy inflow into large caps. Small cap stocks also saw a decent buying of about 200 crore. Mid caps were avoided. Similarly, what we saw in for SBI Mutual Fund, which was avoiding mid cap stocks. Here again, banks were the top bought sector. Telecom, finance followed behind. Among the most sold, again we see healthcare as the most sold sector. Power and automobiles were closely followed the bearishness for the fund house. Among the large cap stocks that were bought and sold by ICICI, we see General Insurance Corporation of India, a huge change. The quantity increased by around 360%. For Adani Ports, it increased by 65%. Then we saw Ambuja Cements, ICICI Lombard General Insurance, and Bajaj Finance that were on the buy list for the fund house. Among the stocks that witnessed a selling pressure were Indiabulls Housing Finance, Bharti Infratel, and Hero Motocorp. As you can see, the quantity change decreased by 36%, 34%, and 28% for these stocks. Among the mid-cap stocks that were bought and sold, ICICI was seeing buying again ACC, Kansai Nerolac, Divi's Labs, Hexaware Technologies, and CES. In buying was the fund house was seeing selling United Breweries, Muthoot Finance, and Cummins India. Reduction of these stocks was seen in the month of October. Among the small cap stocks that were bought, ICICI mutual fund was very aggressive on VST Industries. You can see the quantity increased by 82% over the month. Moderate buying was seeing in Sandhar Technologies, Ashoka Buildcon, and KNR Construction. There was limited selling in among small cap stocks. Only 3 small cap stocks were sold over the month. Here we see Rallis India, Thomas Cook, and AstraZeneca Pharma. Again, there was a moderate reduction in exposure. So ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund was not aggressively selling small cap stocks, but we can see they were buying. So if we see broadly, mutual funds were quite bearish on small cap stocks, given the huge decline in the small cap indices we have seen over the past few months. Over the small cap index is 30%. So in terms of valuation, we feel mutual funds are quite bullish in the small cap segment. Coming to Reliance Mutual Fund, Reliance manages 88,000 crore worth of assets. Again, heavy buying was seen in large cap stocks. About 24,000 crore was invested in large caps. Mid caps and small caps saw buying of about 140 crore each. Your banks were not on top of the list. Refineries, which was Reliance, which was right on top. Finance behind. There was just about 380 crore invested in banks here. FMCG also was the top bought sector of Reliance Mutual Fund. Reliance has done something very different from other fund houses. Among the sectors sold, also we see construction materials, iron and steel, and oil exploration companies that were sold by Reliance Mutual Fund. Among the large cap stocks that were bought were TCS, Adani Ports, and Dabur India. We can see a huge change in exposure to these stocks. Reliance Mutual Fund nearly doubled its exposure to TCS. Similarly for Adani Ports and SEZ. Dabur India and HPCL also witnessed decent buying. On the sell side too, Reliance Mutual Fund was heavily selling Ambuja Cements, Indiabulls Housing Finance, once again among the top sells of mutual funds. Bharat, BHEL also. Then we have Ashok Leyland and Tech Mahindra, where the fund house reduced its exposure quite a bit. Moving on to mid-cap stocks that were bought and sold by Reliance Mutual Fund. Mindtree, again, the fund aggressively increased his exposure here. We see that exposure increased by 186%. ICICI Securities, Oberoi Realty, GM Financial was among the top bought mid-cap stocks by Reliance. Among the mid-cap stocks that were sold was CESC, L&T Technology, Cholamandalam. Here the exposure dropped by over 40% for these stocks. Moving on to the small cap stocks bought and sold by Reliance. We have Dixon Technologies, Navkar Corporation, PVR, that were the top bought stocks. Heavy inflow into Dixon Technologies. The quantity more than doubled. The value in value terms, the company Reliance Mutual Fund holds around 123 crore worth of stocks of Dixon Technologies. Among the small caps that were sold were NIIT Technologies, Raymond, Suzlon Energy. The selling has not been that much for these stocks. Coming over to Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund, which manages about 75,000 crore worth of equity assets. Heavy buying again in large caps, mid caps, and small caps. An equivalent buying of about 240 crore and 209 crore each. Like most of the other fund houses, banks and finance were the top bought sectors. IT, automobiles, refineries followed behind. Top sold sectors included infrastructure, FMCG, and insurance companies. Among the large cap stocks that were bought were Axis Bank, Motherson Sumi, HDFC Standard Life. Again, there was heavy buying in Axis Bank, as we saw in the earlier slides. Axis Bank was the top bought large cap stock. 97% change in quantity for Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund. Similarly, heavy buying was seen in Motherson Sumi and HDFC Standard with about 83% and 50% increase in exposure. Among the large cap stocks that were sold were HPCL, Larsen & Toubro, and Asian Paints. The exposure to HPCL dropped by 35%, L&T, the exposure dropped 31%, and for Asian Paints, it dropped by 24%. Coming over to the mid-cap stocks that were bought and sold. SRF, IIFL Holdings, and ACC were the top bought stocks. Strong buying was seen in SRF. You can see the quantity increased by nearly 600%, so that's around 7 times. The value in value terms may not hold a high percentage in the mutual fund, but we can see there was heavy buying. The fund house was very aggressive on this stock. Similarly, for IIFL Holdings, it increased by 130% over the month. Among the mid-cap stocks that was sold was NACL, the Federal Bank, and LIC Housing Finance. There was a marginal reduction in exposure. NACL reduced by around 25% in the portfolio, while Federal Bank and LIC Housing Finance reduced by around 15%. The fund house was also selling JSPL and Sundaram Finance. Among the small cap stocks bought and sold by Aditya Sun Life, we have NIIT Technologies, Sadbhav Engineering, Strides Pharma. A huge inflow in Technologies, the exposure. Among the, this is an error over here. Moving on to UTI Mutual Fund. We see large cap stocks, about 1,000 crore was invested in large caps. Mid caps around 319 crore was invested in mid caps. Small caps saw outflow of about 46 crore. Among the sectors that witnessed strong buying was banks, automobiles, and finance sectors. We saw an inflow of 281 crore, 240 crore, and 209 crore respectively in these stocks, in these sectors. Among the bottom 5 sectors were construction materials, capital goods, and insurance sectors. The net selling wasn't too high in these sectors by UTI Mutual Fund. Among the large cap stocks bought and sold by the fund house, Interglobe Aviation, Hero MotoCorp, and Grasim Industries were the top bought large cap stocks. A decent quantity change, about 24% to 16% exposure increase in these stocks. Among the large caps sold were General Insurance Company of India, Ultratech Cement, and Lupin. Lupin once again on the sell list of most fund houses. Quantity change wasn't that significant here again for large cap stocks. The mid-cap stocks bought and sold by UTI Mutual Fund, Max Financial Services, Larsen and Toubro Infotech, LIC Housing Finance were the top bought stocks. Strong buying was seen in Max and L&T Infotech. Among the mid-cap sold was NLC India, Voltas, Emphasis, and Pfizer. NLC and Voltas saw a reduction in exposure of about 26% and 10% respectively. Among the small cap stocks bought and sold, GHCL and Dr. Lal Patlabs were among the top bought stocks. Not a very significant increase in exposure. GHCL saw an increase of 14%, while the remaining stocks saw an increase in exposure about 3 to 4%. Not very significant. Among the small caps sold, we have Mahanagar Gas, AkzoNobel, which were the top sold small cap stocks of the fund house. The exposure to Mahanagar Gas dropped by around 30%, while for AkzoNobel, it dropped by around 11%. Coming to Franklin, Franklin did not see heavy inflows into its mutual funds. So of the 1,000 crore that came into Franklin Templeton mutual fund, we saw around 600 crore being invested in large caps, 200 crore in mid caps, and around 250 crore in small caps. The fund house was buying refineries, automobiles, and construction sectors. Banks, as you can see, this is the only fund house that was selling banks. The exposure to bank 31 crore. The exposure to power and healthcare reduced by 65 crore and 18 crore respectively. Among the large caps bought were Ashok Leyland, BPCL, and TVS Motor Corp. Heavy buying was seen in Ashok Leyland, around 80% increase in exposure. On the sell side, we see ICICI, Franklin Templeton Mutual Fund selling ICICI Bank, State Bank of India, HDFC Bank, and Yes Bank. It seems very bearish on these banks for some reason, though the exposure change is not as much. You can see a 9%, 3%, and around a negligible decrease in exposure for these banks. Among the mid caps and small caps stocks bought and sold by the fund house, we see Century Textiles, ACC, and PI Industries as the top bought mid cap stocks. The top sold mid cap stocks were Torrent Pharma, Amara Raja, and Tata Chemicals. Federal Bank, again, one of the banks that was sold. Indian Bank was the bank that was bought by the fund house. We saw an increase in exposure of about 8%. Among the small cap stocks bought and sold, SpiceJet, Mahindra, DCB Bank were the top bought stocks. A significant increase in SpiceJet, around 159% increase in exposure. The fund house was selling only 3 small cap stocks. JB Chemicals, SKF India, and Atul were on the sell side. You can see the marginal reduction in exposure to small cap stocks. This is again in line with the total change in exposure we saw in small cap stocks, where we saw fund houses were not aggressively selling small caps, but they were buying more of small cap stocks over the month. Coming over to Kotak Mutual Fund, again 1,100 crore came into the fund house, which was again heavily invested in large cap stocks. Mid caps saw a marginal increase in exposure of about 37 crore, while small caps there was a reduction of 62 crore. Top sectors: banks, IT, refineries. The bottom 5 included healthcare, FMCG, and finance sectors. The top bought stocks, we can see here Kotak Mutual Fund was heavily buying these stocks. The exposure change increased more than double for these top 5 stocks. HCL Technologies, the exposure increased by around 350%, while for Bharti Infratel, the exposure increased by 215%. Similarly, there was a huge increase for Power Grid and Grasim Industries as well. The fund house is also aggressively selling large cap stocks. Marico, Vedanta, HPCL, STFC, and Aurobindo Pharma were among the top sold large cap stocks. Among the mid caps bought and sold, again aggressive buying was seen in United Breweries and Reliance Capital, an increase of around 360% and 110% increase in quantity. Among the mid caps sold were NACL, Apollo Hospitals, Divi's Lab, IDFC Bank, and REC. Kotak Mutual Fund reduced its exposure by over 30% to these stocks. On the small cap side, there was heavy churn by Kotak Mutual Fund. The fund house was aggressively buying CG Power, the South Indian Bank, Persistent Systems, Capital First. The small cap stocks sold by Kotak Mutual Fund were NIIT Technologies, Raymond, Karnataka Bank, Mahanagar Gas. The exposure reduced by nearly 50% for some of these stocks. Coming over to DSP Mutual Fund, assets managed of about 34,000 crore as on October 2018. A very marginal inflow into DSP mutual fund schemes, just about 322 crore. Of this, just about 2 crore was invested in mid caps, in large caps. Mid caps saw an increase in exposure of 200 crore, while small caps saw an of about 100 crore. Here again, DSP wasn't buying banks. Banks was among the sell list. Among the top bought sectors was finance, retailing, and healthcare stocks. Fund house that was buying the sector. The bottom five also includes infrastructure, gas transport sectors. Among the large cap stocks that were bought and sold, Axis Bank, Grasim, and Yes Bank were the top bought sectors. Heavy buying was seen in Axis Bank. Similarly, for Grasim Industries, the exposure increased by around 55%. Among the large cap stocks sold were Hindalco Industries, ONGC, and Infosys. The exposure dropped by around 42% for Hindalco. For ONGC, it dropped by 23%, and Infosys, it was 16%. Among the mid-cap stocks bought and sold by DSP Mutual Fund, we have L&T Infotech and Varroc Engineering. The exposure more than doubled to these mid-cap stocks. Among the stocks that were sold were Divi's Labs and Edelweiss Financial Services. The exposure to these stocks dropped by around 20%. Among the small cap stocks bought and sold by DSP Mutual Fund, we have Avast Financiers, VMart Retail, and Equitas Holdings that were the top buys. The exposure more than doubled again to Avast Financiers. Among the small cap stocks that were sold, again we see Dixon Technologies, Mahindra Logistics, and Aarti on the sell side. The exposure to the top two stocks reduced by around 13%. For Aarti Industries, it dropped by around 9%. Coming to the last, Axis Mutual Fund with a total assets managed of about 35,000 crore. Around 1,600 crore was invested in schemes of Axis Mutual Fund. Large cap stocks saw a net buying of around 1,500 crore, mid caps 146 crore, while small caps saw an outflow of about 29 crore. Banks, automobiles, retailing were the top bought sectors. Among the top sold sectors were construction, chemicals, and textile stocks. On the large cap side, the fund house was aggressively buying IndusInd Bank. The exposure increased by over 200%, though not that much. Similarly, for Yes Bank, the exposure increased 10%. Other stocks bought that were Titan, Infosys, and Nestle. Titan aggressive, and you should also look at this stock. Among the large cap stocks sold were Dabur India, Asian Paints, Shree Cement. The exposure dropped by around for Dabur, while around 35% each for Asian Paints and Shree Cement. Among the mid-cap stocks bought and sold by the fund house in October, we see Infosys as the most bought mid-cap stock, around 65% increase in exposure for the company. Among the mid-cap stocks sold were PI Industries, Century Textile, and Page Industries. A marginal reduction in exposure to these stocks, just about 3 to 8%. Marginal in decrease in exposure again to Sun Pharma Advanced and Symphony. Like last month, Axis was not heavily churning its small cap portfolio. NIT, Orient, and RT Industries were the top bought stocks. Heavily buying seeing in NIT Technologies, though in value terms it is not that much. Similarly for Orient and RT. In value terms, it is not as much as significant in the portfolio. Among the small cap stocks sold, only 3 small caps was sold, which included Schaeffler India, V-Guard Industries, and TTK Prestige. That brings us to the end of this presentation.
Stop sharing.
If you have any queries, you can write into us at wms@plindia.com. If you would like any more details on the stocks that were bought and sold by mutual funds over the past month, or if you want to know which other stocks that were bought and sold, maybe you can just write into us and we can share the data with you all. Do remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also keep in touch with us for the top equity fund recommendations, top debt fund recommendations. We are always here to guide you. Write to us at wms@plindia.com. Thank you for joining me on a Saturday morning. Special thanks to Arvinder sir and Rashmi Pandey for arranging this webinar. See you soon next month.
Stop broadcast.